Chapter 25 of the Boy Scouts in the Blue Ridge. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kenneth Sergeant Gaghan. The Boy Scouts in the Blue Ridge by Herbert Carter. Chapter 25. Bob Gets His Reward. They could not yet see Polly on account of the darkness, but the sound of her voice had reassured them. Presently a moving figure crept close up to the waiting boys, which they knew must be the queer mountain girl. Polly was far from dainty-looking. She had coarse black hair that possibly seldom knew a comb, and her voice was rather harsh. But nevertheless Thad believed she had a heart under that forbidding exterior, and the spirit of gratitude was transforming her, greatly to their advantage. "I'm right glad you come, even if you were late," she said, as she reached their side. "We started as soon as we could, Polly," said Bob, wondering if the girl really felt hurt because she had been kept waiting. "You see, I had to cross the valley and talk with my cousin Bertha. It was very important that I should see her, for she had news to give me, news that we hope will end in taking her away from that cruel old miser, and giving her over to the keeping of my own dear mother." Polly grunted, as though she felt that she had to exhibit some sign of displeasure, but she said no more on that subject. "I done found the still," she remarked simply. "That's good, Polly," Bob said warmly. "'Cause I've been thar before, but 'twas a long time ago," she went on, as if in apology for any difficulty she may have run across in finding the secret workshop of her father. "Yes," Bob went on encouragingly as she stopped. "You see, they don't want gals and women hanging around thar, and ever since they begun to keep a prisoner there working the mash, I reckons how no one has been up that place." "But you haven't forgotten just how to get there, had you, Polly? You know the old trail, even with its changes. And did they have prisoner, or was it just a story that's been going around all this time?" Bob's impatience could not hold back any longer. He felt that he must know the truth with regard to his father. If there was no prisoner after all, then hope must sink out of sight. On the other hand, should Polly say that she had discovered a guard and a patient working figure kept in restraint for long weary months, he might still hug that fond illusion to his heart that it might yet turn out to be his own father. "Yep, I got there, even if they had hid the trail. Right smart," the girl continued, "and sure enough thar was a prisoner." "Oh," said Bob, and Thad could feel him quiver again with eagerness. The girl was slow, not because she wished to tantalize Bob, but simply on account of her sluggish nature. The hookworm has a firm grip upon most of the poor whites of North Carolina, as well as in Tennessee and Georgia close at hand. It would take something out of the common to arouse Polly. A sudden peril, perhaps, or the anticipation of a new dress, which latter could not be an event occurring in less than yearly stages, Thad had thought. "And he was a man," Polly went on dreamily, "just like you thought, Bob, but his hair had growed so long, and there was so much beard on his face, I just reckon his mother would never know him." "But did you get close enough to say a single word, Polly, just to ask him who he was?" the boy demanded faintly. Thad unconsciously let his arm glide around the figure of his chum. He seemed to fear the result, no matter what the answer of the mountain girl might be. "Sure I did. That's what I went up there for, ain't it?" Polly went on to say. "They had him chained to the rock. I reckon there must have been a guard alongside some of the time, but right then he must have been away. So after peeking around and not seeing any critter standing sentry, I just moseyed up closer to the man and touched him on the arm." Paused again, as if to collect her thoughts, and then yawned. But it was only through habit, and not because Polly felt sleepy. Far from it. She was seldom more wide awake than just then, though it was hard for Thad to believe it. "He looked kind of surprised to see me, 'cause like I done told you, gals, they ain't never been allowed round there since he was took. In course I told him as I just kept finding out who he might be, 'cause there was somebody might wantin' to know the same. And did he tell you, could he speak and still explain? Asked Bob. Sure could, Bob, she replied, a little more earnestly now, as though she realized that the critical point of her narrative had been reached. Never knowed him, with all that hair on his face, but when he said his name, it was sure enough, and she paused dramatically. My father? Gasped Bob. Yep, no other than Mr. Quail, and used to be the marshal of this district some years ago. Your own dad, Bob. Tad tightened his grip on his chum, for he felt him quivering violently. It was a tremendous shock, since for more than 2 years now, Bob and his mother had been forced to believe the one they loved so dearly must be dead. But they say that joy never kills, and presently Bob was able to command his voice again. Oh, you never know what that means to me, Polly, he exclaimed, as he groped around until he had found the girl's hand, which doubtless he pressed warmly in his great gratitude. To think that my poor father has been alive all this time, and a slave up here in the wild mountains, while mother and I have been enjoying all the comforts and luxuries of our home. It just seems to cut me to the heart. But Polly, you talked with him, didn't you? Sure did. He done told me he might got a freed long time ago, if he would promise my dad never to tell where the old still was hid, and never come into these mountains again hunting moonshine stuff. But he says how, since he still must be in the employ of the government, he's bound to do his duty, and not in 1,000 years would he change his mind. Oh, that's just like father, murmured the boy, partly in admiration, yet with a touch of genuine grief in his voice, because of the unnecessary suffering they had all endured on account of this stubborn trait of the part of the one-time marshal. I tells him that all the same, he couldn't and wouldn't stay there much longer. Didn't matter whether he gave his promise or not, 'cause the times had changed. And then I ups and tell him about your being here in the mountains, bound to learn if he was still alive. Yes, and was he pleased when he heard that, Polly? Asked Bob, who was gradually coming around in fine shape, now that the stupendous disclosure had been accomplished, and his anxiety a thing of the past. I should say he was, replied the girl, a little aroused now. Say he done cry, that's what reckons how he might have been sorry for not promising like he did that way long time ago. He asked us how you looked and if your mom was still well, 'cause I couldn't tell him a heap, 'cause I didn't know. But I said to him that you had come up to the mountain to fetch him home, and it'd be a shame if you had to go back alone. So he says as how he'd been thinking about changing his mind about that there promise. Oh, think of it, Thad, breathed Bob, gripping the arm of his staunch chum eagerly. My father is alive after all these terrible months, and perhaps he'll even go home with me. It's worth all I've suffered 10 times. Yes, 1,000 times over. You deserve all the happiness there can be going, Bob. You sure do, declared the scoutmaster positively. I guess nothing could be too good for you, but we don't just understand yet how this is going to be brought about. Will Phin Dady let him go free if he makes that promise, Polly? Sure, he's just gotta now, the girl answered with a little chuckle. You see, like I says before, things have changed a heap now. And my dad, he ain't a feeling sore agin the marshal like he used to. And after what I learned this same night, I tell you, I'd set your dad free on my own account. What did you learn? Asked Thad curiously, seeing that apparently the girl could not of her own free will tell a story, but it had to be drawn from her piecemeal through the means of questions. I was a coming down the mountain, she began. It was about halfway down. I see the lights moving down in the valley. So I just naturally stopped, read what the news was, expecting that it meant trouble for yous. But the more I read, the more I wised I got to the facts. Yes, said Thad encouragingly, though already he understood what was coming. 'Pears like 'tain't enough for yer to skeered off that cat and keep me from getting my face clawed handsome, but you must go and save the life of my Uncle Cliff. He was hurt bad by Nate's gun going off, and bleeding a heap, so they feel sure he never can be taken across to the docks alive. Then they just happen on to your camp down there, and sure his arm is fixed up so stop the bleeding coming. and they fetched him across the valley in good shape. "Oh, it was only a little thing, Polly. It gave me a great deal of pleasure," said Thad, thrilled despite himself by the girl's simple recital of the event. "P'raps 'twere," she replied sturdily, "but my ma, she's got some store by Uncle Cliff, and Dad, he can't nowise go agin what she wants. So I sees right plain, like it was writin', that Bob, he's bound after this to get his dad free." "Oh, it's like a dream to me, Thad. I feel as I must be asleep. Give me a pinch or something, won't you?" "And let me understand that I'm alive," Bob exclaimed. "Oh, you're awake all right, old fellow," replied Thad, with a nervous little laugh. "And unless I miss my guess, Polly here is going to give you another pleasant little surprise, ain't you, Polly?" "I learned about my uncle," continued the mountain girl, "and just think about how Bob has been a wantin' for to learn something about his old man the longest time ever, and so I makes up my mind to fetch him right away up there to Still in the cave, so to see how the man is changed, and feels to get his boys in his arms once again." "Oh, Polly, how can I ever thank you?" exclaimed the excited Bob. "Please let's start then right away. I thought I was tired, but now I'm feeling as fresh as ever I could be. You couldn't go too quick to suit me." End of chapter 25. Recording by Kenneth Sergeant Gaghan.